March 15th, 1929, 12:07 p.m. The first bullet hit the brass door handle of the Metropole Hotel. The second shattered the front window. By the third, people were diving for cover as Tommy guns turned Chicago's Michigan Avenue into a war zone in broad daylight. Inside the lobby, a man named Eddie Vogel stood behind a marble pillar, hands steady, .45 automatic in his grip, while 43 rounds tore through the building he owned. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Craziest part? Eddie had known this was coming. He'd known for exactly 2 weeks, because 2 weeks earlier, he'd done something nobody in Chicago had the guts to do. He'd looked Jack Machine Gun McGurn dead in the eye and said 2 words that would make history. "You're banned." To understand why Eddie Vogel was about to die, or why he thought he wouldn't, you need to understand what the Metropole Hotel was in 1929. It wasn't just a casino, it was neutral ground. Switzerland in a city at war. Chicago in '29 was a divided city. Al Capone's outfit controlled the south side. Bugs Moran's North Siders held everything above the Chicago River, and between them was the Loop, downtown Chicago, where businesses needed protection from both sides. That's where Eddie Vogel came in. Eddie wasn't a gangster. He was a businessman, a former accountant from Milwaukee, who'd moved to Chicago in 1924 with $8,000 and a vision. He bought the Metropole Hotel, a 4-story building on Michigan Avenue, and converted the basement into the city's most exclusive casino. But here's what made Eddie different. He had one rule that every hood in Chicago respected. No gang colors in the Metropole. You wanted to play cards, shoot craps, drink Canadian whiskey? Fine. But you checked your affiliations at the door. Capone's men sat next to Moran's men. Southside bookies played poker with Northside runners. And somehow, impossibly, nobody got shot. For 5 years it worked. The Metropole became the only place in Chicago where the war stopped. Eddie paid protection to nobody because he protected everybody. Capone's outfit got 15% of the casino profits. Moran's crew got 15%. Eddie kept 70% and spent it wisely, bribing cops, judges, and aldermen to keep his neutral zone sacred. Eddie had 3 rules posted behind the bar. 1. No weapons inside the casino. 2. No business talk at the tables. 3. No settling scores on Metropole property. Break the rules, get banned for life. Simple. And for 5 years, nobody tested it until Jack McGurn got drunk. March 1st, 1929, 11:30 p.m. Jack McGurn was Al Capone's most feared enforcer. He'd killed at least 15 men, probably more. He was a boxer turned triggerman with dead eyes and a hair-trigger temper. He was also, on that Friday night, 4 whiskeys past reasonable. McGurn was at the craps table when a Northsider named Danny Green made a crack about the St. Valentine's Day massacre. It had only been 2 weeks since Capone's men had lined up 7 of Moran's crew against a garage wall and machine-gunned them down. The whole city was still talking about it. "Heard you boys don't have the stomach for a fair fight," Green said, rolling dice. "Gotta dress up like cops to do your killing." McGurn's hand went to his waistband. He'd broken rule number 1. He'd brought a .38 snub-nose into the casino, hidden in an ankle holster. Eddie Vogel was across the room, but he saw it happen. He saw McGurn's jacket shift, saw his hand moving. Eddie had 8 security men in the basement, all of them armed, all of them watching. He gave the signal. Before McGurn could draw, 2 of Eddie's men had him by the arms. A third took the .38. The casino went quiet. 50 gamblers, gangsters, businessmen, all watching to see what happened next. McGurn was spitting mad. "You know who I am? You know who I work for?" "I know exactly who you are," Eddie said calmly, walking over, "which is why you should know better. Give me my piece back." "No." McGurn's face went red. "I could have you killed before breakfast." Eddie didn't blink. "You could, but you won't. Because the Metropole is the only place in the city where you're safe from Moran's crew. You kill me, you lose that, and Capone loses 15% of the cleanest money in Chicago." For a moment, nobody breathed. McGurn was a killer. He'd beaten men to death with his bare hands for less disrespect than this, but Eddie had calculated something McGurn hadn't. McGurn needed the Metropole. Every gangster in Chicago needed it. It was the only place where they could relax, where they didn't have to watch their backs every second. "Get out," Eddie said quietly. "You're banned. 30 days. The room erupted. Nobody had ever banned one of Capone's men. Not from anywhere. Not ever. McGurn leaned close to Eddie's face. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." "Maybe," Eddie said, "but the rule stands. 30 days. After that, you come back, you follow the rules like everybody else." McGurn walked out the casino. Stayed silent for a full minute after he left. Then, slowly, carefully, the games resumed. But everybody knew. Eddie Vogel had just crossed a line nobody crosses. What Eddie knew, what he was counting on, was that Al Capone was a businessman first. Capone understood the value of the Metropole. He understood. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. But neutral ground. Eddie was betting his life that Capone would back the ban, would see it as necessary to maintain the sanctity of the only safe space in Chicago. Eddie was wrong. March the 2nd, 1929, 9:00 a.m. Al Capone's headquarters was the Lexington Hotel, 6 blocks from Eddie's Metropole. Capone's office was on the 4th floor, overlooking Michigan Avenue, decorated with expensive furniture bought with illegal money. Jack McGurn walked in that morning still furious. With him was Frank Nitti, Capone's enforcer and consigliere, and Tony Joe Batters Accardo, another trusted lieutenant. Capone was behind his desk, reading the Chicago Tribune, sipping espresso. He was 30, years old, at the height of his power, controlling bootlegging, prostitution, and gambling across Chicago. He wore a custom suit, his hair slicked back, a cigar smoldering in a crystal ashtray. "Jack," Capone said without looking up, "heard you had trouble at Eddie's place." "That accountant threw me out," McGurn said, "took my gun, banned me like I'm some street punk." Capone folded his newspaper. "You brought a gun into the Metropole?" "I always carry." "Not there you don't." Capone's voice was calm, but firm. "That's the rule. Eddie's rule. Our rule. We agreed to it." McGurn's jaw tightened. "So you're siding with him?" "I'm siding with business," Capone said. "The Metropole makes us $5,000 a month. Clean money we don't have to fight for. Eddie keeps the peace. That's worth something." Frank Nitti spoke up. "With respect, Al, this ain't about money. It's about respect. Eddie embarrassed Jack in front of 50 people. Half of them were Northsiders, words already spreading, that we take orders from a civilian." Capone was quiet for a long moment, thinking. This was the calculation he had to make constantly. Business versus respect. Money versus reputation. In the underworld, respect was currency. Lose respect. Lose power. "What do you want to do, Jack?" Capone asked. McGurn didn't hesitate. "I want to walk back in there. I want to play cards like nothing happened. And if Eddie tries to stop me, I want to teach him what happens when you disrespect the outfit." Capone stood up, walked to the window, looked down at Michigan Avenue. "You go back there guns blazing, we lose the Metropole forever. Every neutral space in this city closes down. Moran's crew, the Jennas, the O'Banions, they all start thinking we can't control our own guys. Or," Tony Accardo said quietly, "they start thinking we're weak, that a casino owner can slap us around and we take it." That was the problem. Capone had built his empire on fear and respect. The St. Valentine's Day massacre 2 weeks earlier had been a message. Cross us, die. But now Eddie Vogel had challenged that message, and if Capone backed down, every 2-bit operator in Chicago would start testing boundaries. Capone turned from the window. "Here's what we do. Jack, you go back tonight. You walk in, you sit at a table, you order a drink. If Eddie tries to throw you out, you leave peaceful. No guns, no threats. We give him one chance to back down." "And if he doesn't?" McGurn asked. Capone's face hardened. "Then we remind Chicago who runs this city." March the 2nd, 1929, 10 p.m. Eddie Vogel was in his office above the casino when his head of security, a former cop named Mickey Hannigan, knocked on the door. "Boss, we got a problem. McGurn's downstairs." Eddie had been expecting this. He'd spent the day making phone calls, calling in favors, trying to shore up support. He'd talked to his police contacts, his political connections, even reached out to Bugs Moran's people to see if They'd back his neutral zone. Nobody wanted to get involved. This was between Eddie and Capone. Eddie walked downstairs. The casino was packed, Saturday night crowd, and Jack McGurn was sitting at the blackjack table, cool as ice, playing cards like he owned the place. Every eye in the room was on Eddie. This was the moment. Back down and he loses everything. His reputation, his neutrality, his business. Because if Capone's men can break the rules, everyone can. And if everyone can, the Metropole becomes just another gambling joint, not worth protecting, not worth preserving. Eddie walked straight to McGurn's table. "You're banned, Jack. You know that." McGurn didn't look up from his cards. "Hit me," he told the dealer. "Jack, I'm asking you to leave." Now McGurn looked up. "And I'm asking you to reconsider." "Can't do that." McGurn smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then we got a problem. Eddie's security men moved closer, 8 of them, all armed, against one of Capone's top killers. The math seemed simple, but everyone in that room knew the real calculation. Those 8 men versus the full weight of Al Capone's organization. "You've got until I count to 10, Eddie said quietly. "Then my men escort you out." McGurn stood up slowly. For a second, Eddie thought he might actually leave. Then McGurn leaned close and whispered something only Eddie could hear. "Noon, March 15th, make your peace." Then McGurn walked out, calm and collected, leaving his chips on the table. The casino stayed frozen for 5 full seconds. Then someone coughed, the dealer shuffled, and slowly the night resumed. But Eddie knew. Everyone knew. War was coming. March 3rd, March 14th, 1929. Eddie Vogel spent the next 12 days preparing. He wasn't stupid. He knew McGurn's threat was real. Noon, March 15th, specific time, specific date. That meant a public hit, a message killing. Eddie had 3 choices: run, hide, or fight. Running meant losing everything. The Metropole, his reputation, his life's work. Eddie had $90,000 in the bank, enough to disappear to California or Mexico. But running meant Capone won. Meant every neutral zone in every city would know that gangsters could ignore the rules whenever they wanted. Hiding meant turning the Metropole into a fortress. But you can't run a casino from a bunker. Eventually you have to open the doors, and when you do, they'd be waiting. That left fighting. And Eddie Vogel, former accountant from Milwaukee, decided to do something crazy. He decided to fight Al Capone. First, he went to the police, specifically to Captain John Steege, head of the Chicago PD's Hoodlum Squad, one of the few cops in the city not on Capone's payroll. Eddie told him everything: the ban, the threat, the date, and time. "I want protection," Eddie said. "March 15th, noon. I want uniformed cops outside my building." Steege laughed. "You want me to start a war with Al Capone over a casino?" "I want you to uphold the law." "The law?" Steege leaned back. "Son, the law in this city is whatever Capone says it is." Eddie left the police station with nothing. Next, he reached out to Bugs Moran. If Capone's men were coming for him, maybe Moran would see an opportunity. Eddie sent a message through intermediaries. The Metropole stays neutral. But if Capone violates that neutrality, maybe the North Side wants to make a statement. Moran's response came back 2 days later. "Your fight, not ours." Eddie was alone. So he did the only thing left. He prepared the Metropole for war. He brought in steel shutters for the windows. He reinforced the front doors with steel plates. He bought 12 shotguns and 6. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Thompson submachine guns from a dealer in Gary, Indiana. He trained his 8 security men in defensive positions. He turned his casino into a fortress, and he sent a message to Jack McGurn through the same intermediaries. March 15th, noon. I'll be here. March 15th, 1929, 11:45 a.m. Michigan Avenue was busy. Friday afternoon, people shopping, businessmen heading to lunch, cars honking, the normal rhythm of downtown Chicago. The Metropole Hotel stood on the corner of Michigan and Kermack, 4 stories of limestone and brick, looking like any other commercial building in the Loop. Inside, Eddie Vogel was going through his final preparations. The casino was closed, doors locked, steel shutters pulled down over the windows. His 8 security men were positioned throughout the building. 4 in the lobby, 2 on the second floor, 2 on the roof. Mickey Hannigan, Eddie's head of security, checked his pocket watch. 15 minutes, boss. I know. This is crazy. We should have left town. Maybe, Eddie said. He was behind the front desk, a Remington shotgun leaning against the marble counter. But then what? We come back next month and they're waiting. Next year and they're waiting. You can't run from Al Capone. Eventually you run out of places to hide. So, instead, we die here? Eddie looked at his security chief. You don't have to stay, Mickey. Any of you. Walk out right now. No hard feelings. Mickey didn't move. Neither did any of the other men. They'd all made their choice. At 11:52 a.m., a black Packard sedan pulled up across the street from the Metropole. 2 minutes later, a second Packard, then a third. Eddie watched through the crack in the front door. 12 men got out of those cars. He recognized Jack McGurn immediately. With him was Tony Accardo, Sam Golf Bag Hunt, so named because he carried his shotgun in a golf bag, and 9 other triggermen. They were all carrying Thompson submachine guns, no attempt to hide them. This was going to be public, loud, a message killing that the whole city would see. At 11:58, McGurn looked directly at the Metropole's front door. He knew Eddie was watching. He smiled, checked his watch, then raised his Thompson. The clock struck noon. 12:00 p.m. The first shots came from all 3 cars simultaneously. Not aimed shots, just overwhelming firepower, 43 rounds in the first 7 seconds. The brass door handle exploded. The front window shattered despite the steel shutters behind it. Bullets punched through the limestone facade, tore chunks out of the doorframe, ricocheted off the steel plating Eddie had installed. People on Michigan Avenue screamed and ran. A delivery truck swerved and crashed into a lamppost. A woman dropped her shopping bags and dove behind a mailbox. Inside the Metropole, Eddie's men returned fire. The 2 shooters on the roof opened up with Remingtons, shotgun blasts echoing across downtown Chicago. The men in the lobby fired through gun ports Eddie had cut in the steel shutters. It was a war zone. In the middle of Michigan Avenue, at noon on a Friday. The shooting lasted 90 seconds. 90 seconds that felt like an hour. 90 seconds that used up over 300 rounds of ammunition. Then, suddenly, silence. McGurn's crew was back in their cars. They hadn't tried to storm the building, hadn't tried to actually kill Eddie. This wasn't about killing, it was about the message. Don't cross Al Capone. The Packards roared away, disappeared into Chicago traffic. Eddie stood up from behind the marble counter. His ears were ringing. The lobby was destroyed, bullet holes everywhere, broken glass, spent shell casings rolling across the floor. Anybody hit? He called out. We're good, boss, Mickey yelled back from the second floor. Miraculously, nobody had been killed. Not Eddie's men, not Capone's, not the civilians on the street. The only casualty was the delivery truck driver who had a minor cut from broken glass. Then Eddie heard the sirens, police cars, lots of them, coming fast. This is where Eddie Vogel made his biggest mistake. He thought surviving the shooting was the victory. He thought standing up to Capone's men, not running, not dying, proved his point. He was wrong, because the real fight wasn't with McGurn. It was with the city of Chicago itself. March 15th, 1929, 12:45 p.m. 30 police cars surrounded the Metropole. Captain John Steig led a squad of officers through the shattered front door, guns drawn. They found Eddie standing in his destroyed lobby, shotgun still in his hands. Drop the weapon, Steig ordered. Eddie set the Remington down carefully. They shot up my building. I defended my property. That's legal in Illinois. Legal? Steig looked around at the destruction. You just turned Michigan Avenue into a shooting gallery. 300 rounds fired in downtown Chicago at noon. You think that's legal? I didn't start this. No, but you sure as hell didn't stop it either. Steig gestured to his officers. Arrest everyone in this building. Weapons charges, public endangerment, operating an illegal casino, and anything else I can think of. What about McGurn? What about Capone's men? Steig smiled without humor. What about them? You got any proof it was Capone's crew? Any witnesses willing to testify? Eddie knew the answer. Nobody would testify. Nobody had seen anything. That's how Chicago worked. You're closing me down, Eddie said quietly. "I'm shutting down a public menace," Steek replied. "You wanted to fight Al Capone? Congratulations. You survived 90 seconds. Now you get to spend the next 90 days explaining to a judge why you shouldn't spend 5 years in Joliet prison." Eddie Vogel was arrested along with all 8 of his security men. They were charged with operating an illegal gambling establishment, weapons violations, and reckless endangerment. The Metropole Hotel's casino license was revoked that afternoon. The building was seized as evidence. Everything Eddie had built over 5 years was gone. And Al Capone? He was never questioned. Jack McGurn was never charged. The Chicago Police Department officially declared the shooting an incident of unknown origin and closed the investigation. March 16, 1929, Cook County Jail. Eddie Vogel sat in a holding cell, still wearing his bullet dust-covered suit from the day before. His lawyer, a nervous man named Samuel Rothstein, sat across from him delivering the bad news. "The DA wants 10 years, operating an illegal casino, weapons charges, endangering the public. They're throwing everything at you." "And if I fight it?" Rothstein shook his head. "Judge Hoffman is hearing the case. He's on Capone's. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Payroll. You fight, you lose. You go to trial, you're looking at the full 10, maybe more." Eddie laughed bitterly. "So Capone wins either way. Either I die in the shootout or I rot in prison." "There's a third option," Rothstein said quietly. "Plead guilty to reduced charges, 2 years in Joliet. With good behavior, you're out in 14 months. And the Metropole? Gone. The city's seizing it. They'll auction the building, probably sell it to one of Capone's front companies for pennies on the dollar." Eddie was quiet for a long time. He'd gambled everything on a principle. The principle that rules mattered, that neutral ground was sacred, that even in a corrupt city run by gangsters, some things couldn't be bought or intimidated. He'd been wrong. In Chicago in 1929, everything could be bought, everything could be intimidated. "Take the deal," Eddie said finally. 2 years. April 3rd, 1929. Eddie Vogel was sentenced to 2 years in Joliet prison for operating an illegal gambling establishment. The weapons charges were dropped as part of the plea agreement. He would serve 14 months with good behavior. The Metropole Hotel building was sold at auction for $12,000, a fraction of its value. The buyer was a company called Michigan Avenue Holdings, which everyone knew was a Capone front operation. They reopened the casino 3 months later. This time, there were no rules about checking your guns at the door, no neutral ground, just another Capone property. Jack McGurn was never charged with the shooting. In fact, he was photographed playing golf at a suburban country club at the exact time of the attack, a convenient alibi provided by the club's manager, who happened to owe money to Capone's bookmakers. But here's what the newspapers missed, what the history books don't tell you. Eddie Vogel didn't lose, not completely. Because what happened on Michigan Avenue that day changed something fundamental in Chicago. For 90 seconds, a civilian had stood up to Al Capone's organization and survived. For 90 seconds, 12 of Capone's best triggermen had unloaded 300 rounds at point-blank range and failed to kill anyone. It showed weakness. And in the underworld, weakness is blood in the water. May 1929, October 1931. Over the next 2 years, while Eddie was in Joliet prison, Al Capone's empire began to crack. It wasn't one thing, it was 1,000 small things. The St. Valentine's Day massacre had brought national attention. The Metropole shootout had shown that Capone's men were willing to turn downtown Chicago into a war zone. Reform politicians started winning elections. Federal agents started investigating. And in October 1931, while Eddie Vogel was living quietly in Milwaukee, working as an accountant again, Al Capone was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. Jack McGurn lasted longer, but not by much. On February 15, 1936, exactly 7 years after the St. Valentine's Day massacre, McGurn was gunned down in a bowling alley on Milwaukee Avenue. His killers left a Valentine card next to his body. Message delivered. 1945, 16 years later. Eddie Vogel died in 1945, 63 years old, of natural causes. He never returned to the gambling business. He spent the last years of his life as an accountant for a shipping company, living in a modest apartment in Milwaukee, largely forgotten by history. But in Chicago's underworld, his name became legend. Not as a gangster, not as a killer, but as the man who banned Al Capone's inner circle and lived to tell about it. They told the story for decades, about the casino owner who thought rules mattered more than guns, about the 90-second shootout that destroyed his business but damaged Capone's reputation even more, about the accountant from Milwaukee who chose principle over survival and somehow got both. Here's what Eddie Vogel understood that most people miss. Winning isn't always about surviving. Sometimes winning is about making your enemy show their hand. Sometimes winning is about forcing them to prove they're exactly as brutal and unreasonable as everyone suspects. The Metropole shootout didn't save Eddie's casino, but it helped end Al Capone's reign. It showed Chicago, showed America, that the gangster emperor had no clothes, that behind the expensive suits and business talk was just a violent thug willing to destroy downtown property in broad daylight over a 30-day ban from a card game. And that revelation, that moment of clarity, was worth more than any casino. Eddie made one mistake. He thought the law would protect him. He thought neutral ground meant something. He thought principles mattered. He was wrong about the first two. But maybe, just maybe, he was right about the last one. Because here's the thing about principles. They're expensive. They cost you everything. Your business, your freedom. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Sometimes your life. But they're also the only thing that separates men from monsters in a world where the difference isn't always clear. Eddie Vogel paid the price. He lost his casino, served his time, died in obscurity. But he died knowing he hadn't bent, hadn't broken, hadn't let Jack McGurn sit at his table and prove that rules were meaningless. And in Chicago in 1929, in a city drowning in corruption and violence, that tiny act of defiance mattered more than anyone realized. Al Capone controlled the city, but Eddie Vogel proved. That control isn't the same as respect. You can own every politician, every cop, every judge. You can line up your enemies and machine gun them in a garage. You can shoot up hotels in broad daylight. But you can't make people believe you're anything other than what you are. A gangster, a criminal, a man who rules through fear because nothing else works. That's what the click of an empty chamber taught Bumpy Johnson. And that's what 90 seconds of gunfire on Michigan Avenue taught Chicago. Power without respect is just violence wearing an expensive suit. And eventually, inevitably, the suit comes off.